My name is Fay Saacks now. I was Fay Annalik, or as the South Africans used to call themselves, Fay Annalik. But of course, when we lived in Rhodesia, we had to anglicize the pronunciation. And I think back to my days in Rhodesia as being in many ways the most family-orientated and close to the community part of my life, although it has been ever since wherever I have lived. But that's where I got the foundation of my realizing how important the community and family are. My mother's bachelor uncle, Harry Margolis, came out to Rhodesia and landed up in a place called Inyazura in the early years, I think before the First World War. He established himself and started a little trading store in Inyazura. There wasn't another. There were very few white people there, let alone Jews. And a few years later brought out his older brother, who was my grandfather, who left behind a little wife, 3 children, and one on the way. And they didn't see their father for many, many years. When eventually my mother and her siblings came out, they had a trading store, they had interests in cattle farms, mealie farms, and they were already the foundation of the community in the Eastern District. And I remember we used to go in a little car, my parents, whom I'd love to tell you about as well, my parents, my brother and I, and a big fat nanny in this little car with a dicky in the back on those strip roads to Inyazura. It used to take just about all day to get there, but it wasn't very far. And why did we go there more often than not? A, to listen to the news coming in, and we had to be very, very quiet because it was during the war, and I couldn't understand why it was so very serious. B, because there were Zionist meetings, and people used to come from Salisbury, and emissaries used to come from South Africa and even from Palestine in those years to collect money. And of course the Ponevesha Rebbe, who used to come to collect for the Ponevezh Yeshiva. And everybody in the area, by that time, my grandparents had encouraged a lot of young bachelors to come and live in that area. And the Buffenstein family began by living in my grandparents' house and then branching out. They imported, if you want to call it that way, 2 young bachelors from Cape Town, from the Jewish orphanage there, were brought to live in Inyazura and work in the stores, as we called it then. And I don't remember anything in my life except Jewish matters. So much so that when a couple of years later I was at the Blakiston School then in Salisbury and the war was on, we stood in a queue, it wasn't a queue, in a line before you came into class in the morning, and 2 of the girls standing next to me, whom I thought were very good friends of mine, said, you Jew girl, it's because of you that our fathers have had to go into the army. I was in shock. I didn't realize that there were Jew girls and other people. So that was my first introduction to the fact that we weren't only a Jewish community, but part of people who were really different. And so, jumping forward a bit, when I was in high school and very young for my age, and I was made the first and I think only Jewish prefect and then the vice head girl and head of a what did we call it?
A house.
A house. Stanley House it was, and we had a purple badge, which is why I like purple. I thought to myself, you see, the Jewish girl has not done so badly if I'm considered a leader of the other girls, because we were very few Jewish girls at the girls' high school in those years. But continuing with community, it seemed to me that nothing else existed but the Jewish community in the Zionist community, even more than the Jewish community in Salisbury, because my mother was so involved with wheat sow and with fundraising, and my father with the shul, with the board of deputies. We never had a moment to think of ourselves except for the family, because by that stage my father had brought out his two sisters, his two younger sisters from Lithuania, from Ponevich, and his mother, and they got married, and everybody had children, and the only people who were really educated in the English way of living and the English syllabus was my mother and my father. And all those first cousins used to come to our house after school every day, and she would help them with their homework, to such an extent that Cassie, my brother, and I were left to fend for ourselves, and thank God we did okay. But it was family before everything else, and the community very much part of that. My father came to Salisbury in a very different way. He had always been very clever, and he was sent away from home when he finished school, gymnasia. He was sent to France to study engineering and never ever went back. And he had an uncle in Port Elizabeth who sponsored him to go and leave and come to Port Elizabeth. And his first job with all these degrees of his was to work, it was very difficult in those years, was to work in, I can't remember what it was called, but the movie industry, the cinema industry. And he was sent as a technician. He was sent all over the country to install the first talkie movies. I remember it was, "Oh Rosemary, I love you." We used to get sick of hearing that song because that was the one that he installed all over. And he came to Salisbury eventually to install the system there. Saw my mother walking along the road, and somebody said, "That's a nice little Jewish girl," and the rest is history.
What year was this?
They got married in 33, and I think this must have been in 32. And I was born in 34, by which time my father, my Uncle Harry, had invested in a very small, very decrepit soap factory in Salisbury, and asked my father whether he'd be interested in developing it, and the rest is history. It wasn't so much olivine, it started with soaps, and then oil, margarine, candles, and it was a wonderful, wonderful life. I think Cassie and I were the most privileged of young children because we had this wonderfully warm family. We were instilled with all, I think, the correct values. And Habonim was very much part of my life. So I think I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more at another stage.
You've got a couple more minutes. You then went to university?
I went to university in Cape Town, which most of the Salisbury people did. And then after I graduated, I came back and taught in Salisbury for a couple of years until I got married and lived in Cape Town. I've had a very checkered career.
And your decision to come and live in Israel?
Always wanted to come on Aliyah. And it was one of those things that life hands out all sorts of tricks to you. But I got married, I lost my first husband, I went back again to Salisbury to live with my parents for a year or more. And then when I married Cully, I said to him immediately, "I'm coming to live in Port Elizabeth, but we'd better start making plans." It took us nearly 14 years, but we eventually did come. It was sheer idealism, if you want to call it, and we've never been so content and fulfilled as since we've been here. Any more questions?
I'm sure there are a lot more stories, but thanks
There are
very,
lots
very
more
much.
stories.
Thank you very, very much.